Calling all SCP Foundation staff. Calling all SCP Foundation staff. This is Dr. Theron Sherman, anomalously broadcasting from Site-42. Do you read us? We are checking the YouTube chat. Please make sure to like, share, subscribe, and do all those other YouTube things using your Foundation encrypted YouTube account. That's right, your Foundation issued encrypted YouTube account. Please do not share these on your civilian account, Steve. Looks like we are going live. It seems like the chat can hear me. Testing, testing, 1, 2, 3. This mic is hot, and so are we. Can you hear us? We are digitizing our signal through the YouTube space. As soon as the chat reads us, we are good to go. Looks like we have a delay live in 16 minutes. What are you talking about? I'm live now. Steve, did you mess this up? Let me interact by text. Let me make sure we can be heard. All right, someone just said, "God damn it, Steve," so I'm hoping that means we're live. I'm going with it. Let's do this. 3, 2, 1. Hey there, Foundation staff. This is Dr. Sherman, but you can call me Sherm. Welcome to another anomalous broadcast from Site-42. For anybody unfamiliar with our broadcast, the rundown goes like this. Number 1, I read you an SCP document or tale or something from the SCP Wiki creative writing community. B, I open up the floor to the community to discuss what we've read. We're often visited by SCP authors, staff, and fans, and if we're lucky, the author of the article themselves shows up to share some insight. Remember that if you'd like to join the conversation, I will be monitoring the chat for questions from viewers that we can discuss at the end of the reading, as will my guest answer any questions they can. Also remember that if you enjoy the show, leave a like and a comment to let us know, subscribe and hit the bell, and if you really want to help us out, become a patron at the patreon.com/site42, link in the description. Tonight, we are going over SCP-2718, titled What Happens After, by author Michael Atreus. And while Michael Atreus is not here with us tonight, we do have a very special guest joining us tonight, one Mr. Dr. Maxwell from his YouTube channel, linked in description, and he is audible now. Hello, Dr. Maxwell.
Hey, hi, what's going on?
Welcome to the anomalous broadcast from Site-42. How do you do?
I am great. Thanks for having me, man. I'm excited.
And be clear, pronouns are he, him?
Oh,
right?
Yes, I'm, he, him.
Gotcha, clear. So, when I discussed having you on the show tonight, and I suggested picking an article you were a fan of, this is the first one you came up with. So what drew you to 2718?
Man, I've always loved this article. You said something to me earlier. It's the only article that really actually kind of makes you feel fear, and I've always loved that. It was the article that played a big part in me actually making a YouTube channel because I loved it so much. I wanted to make a video on it. So it's got a very special place in my heart. And I just think any SCP fans who haven't heard it or read it should definitely, get on it. So always happy to spread it to more people.
And enumerating on this before, and something I touched on lightly during the Halloween stream when we did this during the 24 hours, so it's lost to the stream. This is the only article that instills any sense of fear in me at all, because for 5 years during college and after, I worked as a Halloween scare actor at Busch Gardens Howl-O-Scream in Tampa, Florida. Before that, I was the kind of teenager who had haunted house movie nights. We watched all the worst horror movies with our friends. And so I'm pretty desensitized towards horror and gore and stuff like that. In fact, very clearly what happened this week is that my new SCP article, which if you didn't know, I wrote a new SCP article, viewers, SCP-5542. Well, spoilers for the ending a little bit. At the last line, it is referenced that the food in the house is human remains. And it's one line. It's very clinically written. It's not supposed to be gore or anything like that. But someone in the discussion said it felt like a cheap shock twist at the end to say the food was human remains. And I was like, a cheap shock twist? That's actually pretty tame compared to what we have on this site, right? But like the one thing I fear in this world besides needles, I hate needles, hate shots. When I get vaccinated, I'm going to complain about it the entire time.
Oh, same.
But the only thing I really, truly fear is death. Philosophically, it horrifies me. The idea that I'm done making a mark on the world, on people, making art, convincing people to make more art. I fear the end of that run. And then for something like 2718 to make it worse?
So much worse. Yeah.
So yes, we are getting into my personal problems tonight. But thankfully, in case you viewers don't know, Dr. Maxwell has his own YouTube channel. It is just called Dr. Maxwell, right?
Yeah, Dr. Maxwell SCP readings.
So Dr. Maxwell SCP readings, about how long have you been making SCP readings on your channel?
About 2 years or so.
If you enjoy Dr. Maxwell's reading of tonight's article, perhaps you will enjoy the readings on his channel, which are edited rather than live, and have better visual effects than mine do. It's definitely closer to Volgan's aesthetic than mine, which is just a title card.
Oh, you're too nice, Sherm.
And Maxwell has generously agreed that in the spirit of SCP community, I am allowed to critique his performance a little bit after the fact in order to, as a theater college dropout, but voiceover artist and actor and community theater level at least, I can maybe give some insight and help his voice acting as well.
Right on.
So without any further ado, Maxwell is doing the reading. I will be scrolling the text on screen during the read, and whenever you need me for a voice, shout and I'll hop in.
Will do. Let me get this pulled up real quick. Just want to say hi to my mom and sister if you guys are watching. What's up? All right. Here we go. You got it pulled up? Right on. Okay. First time doing a live reading ever. Anyone who watches me knows I really edit my stuff pretty heavily, so bear with me. Believe it or not, when I read stuff, I make a ton of mistakes. You just wouldn't know because you never see any of that. So here we go.
It's very funny. My channel, I often have the primer, "Dear God, you would think I do voice acting for a living or something," because of how often I make mistakes in the live streams.
Yeah. It's a whole other animal when you just got to keep rolling through it. So we'll see how I do. Thanks for the compliment, Cattails. I see you. All right, let's go. Item number SCP-2718. Object class not found. Special containment procedures. SCP-2718 is a Dameron class cognitohazard. All personnel, regardless of clearance, are forbidden to expose themselves to the description of this article under any circumstances. Do not tamper with this warning without Dameron clearance. Do not discuss the existence of this article with any person. No disciplinary action will be necessary, provided you close this article now and clear your browser cache. Atypical software measures have been used to mitigate the risk of accidental exposure. It is only by an unfortunate coincidence of extremely low probability that you have stumbled across this entry at all. No disciplinary action will be necessary, provided you close this article now and clear your browser cache. Since creation, only the Special Containment Procedures section of this record has ever been editable. Due to the clearance of the file's original author and anomalous database limitations in effect, this record can neither be deleted nor effectively redacted. Access restrictions cannot be applied to the data in any reliable way. Of course, access restrictions can still be enforced. It is now too late to close this article. Do not discuss the existence of this article with any person. Notify the help desk that your workstation has a Damarung contamination. Shut off your monitor and seek immediate amnestic treatment. The following conditions shall constitute a breach: exposure to any part of the description, however briefly, and failure to close this article within 18 seconds of exposure without code word clearance. Shut off your monitor now. Notify the breach desk that you and your workstation have Damarung contamination. Await MTF processing. Damarung eyes only. Agent instructions. The breach to which you are responding has already been mostly contained by an automated system, and containment will be complete when you restart this terminal. However, your orders are to attempt to improve the current containment procedures by any means possible, within the time allotted to you. You have been temporarily granted administrative network access from this terminal. Use any resources you deem necessary to fulfill your mission, but do not expose yourself to the cognito hazard in the description. The following technical details will help you in your task. As noted above, this article ignores the delete command. It cannot be extricated from the database without extensive collateral corruption of other critical systems. Instead, the containment strategy is to minimize the probability of a user discovering this entry by chance. To this end, an unhaltable mainframe process repeatedly switches the ordinal designation of this article with that of another randomly selected entry. Normally, when two article numbers are exchanged for administrative purposes, the two entries disappear from the index momentarily. A kernel exploit of processor Eridum23 allows us to delay completion of the subroutine by deeply recursing the article, renumbering it with an intentionally terrible algorithm, currently Bogosort, against a known corrupt stack in extended memory until the thread aborts catastrophically, the index swap completes, and the process restarts. This artificially inserts a delay on the order of 10 to the 17th power clock cycles between visibility, when a link to this article becomes momentarily visible and accessible from the article index before the process repeats. Breach will only occur in the unlikely event that a user with index privileges loads the main list at precisely the correct moment, and, despite need-to-know best practices, follows the link to this entry, ignores the warnings, and reads past the first paragraph. The intervals between visibility are indeterminate, but finite. On average, the interval will grow larger by order of O(n) squared as the number of available articles grows, but shorter as the mainframe's hot swappable processors increase in flops. This kludge has a gravely serious side effect. The SCP article randomly selected for the swap also disappears from the list for the same period of time, until reappearing under a new ID. While O5 has authorized this detrimental effect as an acceptable consequence of containment, you are ordered not to verify it through the chain of command, as no other living person is currently aware that this article, this process, or this authorization exists. If validation is required, an inline O5 authorization of this order follows. You are subject to summary termination by Trinitite class Memetic if you proceed past this point. Damarung eyes only. Editor's note: I had to throw that kill sprite together in a hurry. The one constructed and installed by my predecessor was clearly defective. Instead of the donkey kick I expected from a standard inoculation interdiction, I barely registered minor eye strain. Of course, under the circumstances, I suppose we're limited, aren't we? To a contaminated workstation and barely adequate tools. Anyway, if you survive that memetic, hopefully it's because you have code word clearance, and not because I didn't get it right either. In that case, you're probably boned pretty bad, and I apologize for not killing you in time. But cut me some slack. When we looked him up 90 minutes ago, the only procedures for this code word read, randomly select one mainframe qualified coder from the Experimental Containment Research Group with Level 3 clearance, supply the designee with a Behemoth-class amnestic, and dispatch them to the affected terminal. They will find instructions there. If they fail to complete their task within 2 hours, or if upon return they can remember the year or the name of the current US president, terminate. Guess what? That's a pretty small subset of personnel to choose randomly from. Well, Spock smashes scissors, but paper disproves Spock, so now in return for containment duty, I get to blow a sizable chunk of my life out of my skull. At least I won't have to remember them processing the looky-loo who caused this breach. Assuming you're ECRG like me, you've never heard of Damarung before today either. Here's what I can tell you. From the look of the source code in the comments, you're probably the 4th or 5th to respond to this thing since inception. I made a couple of minor edits to the documentation above, but mostly spent my time trying to slow the algorithm with the worst patterns I could think of. In the end, I was only able to de-optimize the existing recursion by a factor of 2. Unfortunately, I don't know enough about the underlying hardware or how often users follow unfamiliar links from the main list to guess how much different that makes. I'm sure on the first implementation, they thought they had 5, maybe 10 years between breaches, but I know for a fact that they've introduced at least one quantum processor to the grid, which will deprecate this approach faster than you can say redacted. Hopefully you've got a better idea for a slower algo than I, or the last 3 did. Maybe upgrade to a quantum BOGO sort of the article numbers? On this hardware, that might technically be an XK algorithm and therefore forbidden. I don't know. I've used up most of my time already, and I can't risk another recompile in the few minutes remaining before I have to commit these changes and wash down this stick of dynamite with warm, backwashy Mountain Dew. Andrew's out. P.S. I guess I got to thinking my brain was hosed either way, so what the hell. And I don't know why, but I just went ahead and did it. Couldn't help myself, really. Resist the urge. It's clearly a fridge-class cognitohazard, and it's already starting to sink in, so this horse pill better work right quick. Description. Begin recording. Sounds of a microphone tapping and a chair sliding can be heard. All right, and I'll have you step in here, Sherm, and play the assistant here.
Sounds good. Ready.
All right, go for it.
There you go, ma'am. This interpreter is new technology, but it will allow you to forego the use of a keyboard for article creation. Just speak slowly into the microphone. We can go back and revise any errors after you've finished.
I don't think so, young man. There won't be time. This must also be a permanent record, access restricted to L3s and up. Can you prevent anyone from tampering with this entry later?
Anyone, ma'am?
Anyone and everyone. You understand me? If there is ever but one article left in the database, this had better be it.
Well, I'm not senior enough to select the most appropriate technique to accomplish that. Maybe if we got Gephardt involved.
I want you to make an executive decision. I'm confident in your ability. We cannot delay.
Okay. There is a mechanism I could take advantage of. It's actually designed to protect against anomalous data corruption, but it would have the effect you're looking for. If you're certain, ma'am, I could make this section of the article write once and splice it into the database runtime. However, that means no editing whatsoever will be possible. If you misspeak, you'll just have to clarify and keep going.
Very well, do so. Fortunately, I am a world-class dictator.
For the degree of security you have in mind, ma'am, I'll need to borrow your credential token. Thank you. One moment, please. There. That's done it.
You've been very helpful. That'll be all. For your own safety, I am ordering you to obtain amnestic treatment as soon as possible. Enough to forget this entire morning. Do you understand?
Yeah, do.
Good. You will likely be subjected to enhanced interrogation within a day or two. It'll go easier for you if you have no memory of this.
Oh boy.
As a literal token of my gratitude for your loyalty, why don't you hold on to those credentials? I won't be needing them. If you act quickly, I suspect you can think of a way to put them to good use before they're revoked and you're detained.
Yes, ma'am.
Now go. I foresee that you have a fine career ahead of you. We will not speak again.
Thank you, ma'am. Goodbye.
My name is Miriam Prather. I have been 05-7 for 77 years. I will remain so for perhaps 7 minutes more, and that is not enough time to devise adequate special containment procedures myself. I leave that to you. Over the course of my tenure, I have witnessed 19 distinct anomalous methods to restore life. The devices and entities responsible take vastly different forms, but when you look past the science, the magic, the razzle-dazzle, There are fundamentally two broad but simple categories. The first type is replication, whereby a clone, simulacrum, or other copy is made of the subject's mind and body as it existed at some point during life. The second sort is temporal. With this approach, the space-time paths of the subject's constituent particles are reversed, and events literally undone until the subject is restored to a functional state. These two categories have a crucial commonality. The restored individual has no memory or experience of death. To put it another way, despite 2.4 million years of hominid speculation, Foundation records contain no reliable first-hand testimony regarding what happens to us after we die. We have other sources of information, naturally, but in light of recent events, I believe that the SCPs we have interrogated on this topic over the years are guilty of either ignorance or deceit. For you see, we invented an exception. 6 months ago, we resurrected Roger Sheldon, formerly 05-11, with a novel procedure. The theoretical groundwork had existed for some time, but for a litany of reasons, the complexity of the process, the technical skill required, the systemic risks, not to mention the enormous cost, only the direst need justified the attempt. At 73, Roger was the youngest overseer when he died. He had two habits that were peculiar for an 05, only marginally tolerated by the rest of us at the time, and now forbidden. The first was an obstinate refusal to fortify, as we call it, to enhance his longevity with the supplements available to those of our station. The second was a penchant for taking his holidays unannounced and in utter solitude. When a stroke ended him 18 years ago, he was perched on a rocky promontory above marine iguana nesting grounds on Espanola Island. It took 14 years to find his remains. We would not have gone on looking for so long, but for two reasons. He kept on his person a certain key, of which I shall not say more, except that it could not be allowed to stay lost, and that he held in his brain a secret word, without which we could not replace him. The alternating Galapagos rains and bright sun, and perhaps hawks, had reduced him to a moldering ruin of bone fragments and only the stubbornest sinew. The recovery crew used brooms and bags to collect as much of him as remained. The artifact was retrieved, to our relief, but we were still faced with the daunting task of extracting his shibboleth. With so little original material to work with, none of the time-tested methods of recovery were feasible. It distresses me to say so, but it is unlikely that any records of our methodology will survive the impending purge. Suffice to say that having gathered his diaspora, we set out to reconstruct a quantum approximation of him, physically, chemically, electrically, with sufficient accuracy that his heart would resume its beat, his synapses would fire, and his mouth would move, if briefly. As we required but one iota of information from him, we had hoped at best that he would survive long enough to provide it, and then simply expire again. However, as is so often the case, we outdid ourselves. All the king's horses and all the king's men could indeed put him back together again. Roger was perfectly reanimated. He emerged from his cocoon, looking a bit younger and healthier than my last memories of him. He sobbed uncontrollably for some time, unresponsive to any stimulus, yet after about a half hour he relaxed. His expression suddenly turned to utter serenity, and he spoke two unintelligible but clearly joyous words. He was swiftly interrogated, but he responded to our questioning with candor, enthusiasm, and an unmistakable relief. We kept him under quarantine in a containment unit for 30 days. He offered no objection and cooperated completely. He behaved as any of us might under the circumstances, and in the end, after some light debate, we unanimously restored him to office. We were the ones who'd remade him, after all, and wouldn't each of us expect the same? He rewarded our hubris by resuming his duties with an inspired vigor, consistently displaying deeper insight and wisdom than ever before. In particular, we welcomed some of the changes to his habits. As soon as the rest of us allowed it, he began regular fortification treatments for the first time. He appointed a sensible entourage of medical staff and bodyguards that were never far from his person. Previously, empathy for his fellow man had never been his strong suit. Yet suddenly, he displayed renewed interest in the safety of our containment protocols, the healthcare benefits of Foundation employees, and a profound distaste for the sacrifice of D-Class. Under the circumstances, none of this struck us as particularly alarming behavior, but it should have. He had concealed the crux of it from us all, you see. At first, naturally, in our initial interrogation... He had concealed the crux of it from us all, you see. At first. Naturally, in our initial interrogation, we'd asked him if he had any experience or memory of the afterlife. He claimed to recall nothing, exactly as everyone always does, and defeated our polygraphs completely. He approached me first, about 2 months ago. He asked if, in his absence, we'd obtained any pieces, which I shouldn't have to point out is not our term of art, capable of sustaining life indefinitely. While breathtaking longevity is now within our power, it may surprise you to learn that immortality is not, and our best theoreticians have recently posited that it will never be attainable. The resurrections we can accomplish, even his, cannot be repeated more than once or twice. Sapient life is necessarily intertwined with quantum uncertainty. Localize a particle with perfect precision, and it attains infinitely uncertain momentum, lost in an instant. Just so, the longer and more tightly a consciousness is bound to a specific vessel, the more likely it will scatter irretrievably on its own. Regardless of science, magic, or razzle-dazzle, you, your children, and your great-great-grandchildren will one day most assuredly die and stay dead. His disappointment at this theorem was palpable, and I experienced a moment of discomfort at his reaction. Not a week later, 05-2 received word of a severe breach of protocol. Roger, or rather 05-11, had initiated direct contact with an ape in containment. For you L3s, ape skips are apex-tier, pluripotent entities. I imagine you can work out the euphemism. We kept our initial investigation off the books. He'd been clever in covering his tracks. There was no breach alarm, no record of the encounter in any log. But one of the skip's guards failed a random amnestic test, to his dismay, and that was trail enough on which to set our bloodhounds. We couldn't prove it, but we imagine he risked exposure to the skip to offer some kind of deal. This could not stand. As two of his oldest comrades, today 05-2 and I confronted him privately. But he caught us off guard, for he confessed everything and begged us for help. I surreptitiously recorded his pleas as a precaution. It is easiest if I simply replay it for you now. Thanks for reminding me to stay hydrated, Ink and Dreams. All right. All right, now we're going into Roger's recording here. I dared not speak of this at first. You'd never have let me out of containment. The truth is, I was aware of all of it. I suppose there was a sweet oblivion, like deep sleep at first, but in retrospect, I think it was no more than a day. Slowly, but unmistakably, I reoccupied my corpse with dreamlike consciousness, numb for the first few merciful hours, blind, deaf, and immobile. But then I seemed to reconnect to every nerve and became aware of every sensation, more so than I ever was in life. I perceived myself trapped within an immovable object, and the intensity of the struggle amplified, subtle, then acute, then racking. I cannot describe it completely, but imagine holding your breath, beyond urge, beyond pain, beyond desperation, head throbbing and eyes bulging, a dream of suffocation without end. My skin blistered and split in the sunlight. Biting insects descended rapidly. I felt eggs hatch, larvae crawl, gases build and burst within me, individual cells rupturing, interstitial fluids souring and blackening. Somehow my capacity to experience and store these sensations grew, even as I was keenly aware of my cerebrum being scattered and devoured. My perception expanded into the gizzards of birds and the depths of fire ant dens. I was aware of every fingernail and strand of hair that pulled away in the wind, and my sensation clung to them as they settled in the ocean and dissolved in the maws of a trillion diatoms. I don't understand it. The more bits of me there were, the larger my capacity for the perception of pain. As I decayed into pieces smaller than living nerves could possibly distinguish, the character of the discomfort changed. From burning and aching and breaking, I might relate to you in human terms, to something worse that I cannot fully articulate. A terrible, maddening stretching of every part of myself from every other part. Humans often numb to chronic pains in life, do they not? Yet every year, every month, every second that passed, I swear it only intensified over time. In my previous life, I ruminated on heaven and hell, and the likelihood of my experiencing one, the other, or something in between. As terrible as I imagined the torpor of heaven or the torments of hell to be, this was entirely different from either. In hell, at least, there would surely be a tormentor, some memory of my deeds, some sense of justice, even if my soul rejected its logic. I can imagine some comfort in hell for a mind such as mine. I do not think this is a punishment. I do not think it is caused. I deeply suspect it is simply our condition, our nature to go on this way, do you see? In all that time, I was certainly, absolutely, totally alone. And before long, all memory of life had shriveled to a cinder, lost beneath my interminable anguish. Alive again, I suspect I cannot quite recall the worst of it, as if my living brain is too small for the experience. As overseers, we witness, inflict, or endure great suffering. Yet what awaits us all is worse. The way an earache is worse than a bee sting. The way frostbite is worse than a burn. I was dead for 18 years, and my misery eludes description. Dare we try to fathom the collective agony of legions of ancient dead? Believe this, I will not return to that execrable existence. Not 100 years from now, not ever. Yes, I approached Araman for help. I am sure he could extend us all, if he wished. I offered him great concessions from the Foundation, even perhaps release. But he laughed and refused. Yet I can think of others willing to trade on a smaller scale, though the price may, though the price may be nearly as... No, nothing compares. Anything is better, so long as it's forever. Do you believe me? Will you join me, and together escape this fate? Please. We were dumbfounded, and suddenly sympathetic, and an instant later, fearful. I can't remember the last time I felt my heart rate felt my heart race so. But we do not operate in a vacuum. A revelation of this magnitude must be brought before the council for consideration. He was loath to admit his deception before the assembled council, but he was clearly desperate for action as well. We prevailed upon him to call an immediate emergency session and teleconference. I knew anything less would constitute treachery. Still, as the three of us hurried to Conference Room Alpha, I suddenly found myself harboring subtle thoughts of... And so he gave his testimony again, nearly as frank and purply prosaic as before. But the debate that unfolded in the wake of it, I have never witnessed anything like it. There were mostly skeptical voices at first, calm, concerned, and thoughtful. However, 05-8, whose face had grown increasingly pale as she listened to him, was suddenly a passionate advocate for action. We must declare human death a Keter SCP, she demanded, and contain it at any cost. That absurdity garnered an uproar, of course, but Roger had himself a sure ally now, and this spurred him on, shouting over the others to add even darker details of the intensity of his perennial excruciation. Imagery I cannot repeat, sensations I must not contemplate. I'm feeling lightheaded. 05-2, always a moderate influence, suggested we recess and collect ourselves, but then -3 suddenly moved that we order the immediate systematic termination of dangerous skips to better protect ourselves and others. 05-6 seconded, but before it could be put to a vote, -13 suddenly clutched his chest in paroxysmal panic and was being evaluated by his medical technician when his feed abruptly cut out. As the fracas came to a boil, it was -10, I think, who was next convinced. Oh, is belief the key? It doesn't matter. At any rate, Dash 10 started pounding his shoe on the table, hollering that we must dig a channel from the Astrakhan Spring to the Mediterranean Sea to fortify all of mankind. That was enough. Suddenly, 05-1 muted us all and stood red-faced and shaking. Regardless of the truth of 05-11's experience, she said, it is plain that we have lost all reason. There is only one possible explanation for this. Therefore, I am declaring Emergency Protocol 17. Remain where you are. We shall all be administered Class A amnestics, except you, Roger. We made a grave error releasing you from containment, and it will be corrected. She pointed at her administrative assistant to act, but before he could lock down the conference room from which -2-11 and I were dialed in, Roger had already bolted out the door. I was after him in an instant, and nearly crushed by the bulkhead as it slammed into place. I only wanted to stop him, I think, and now I was outside the safe room too, but he was already out of sight. Superlative idiot. They couldn't see me, couldn't hear me. They couldn't know that I wanted back in, how badly I wanted to breathe the red gas that was surely already streaming into the room on the other side. One instant of poor judgment, and my fate is sealed. And now that I know what's in store, what was left to do? I ran to the help desk. Help enough, eh? For this, my final act. I love the Foundation as I would have loved a daughter. I do this for the security and protection of mankind. And so I beg you, this gnosis must not be erased, forgotten. That is not containment. That is madness. Bring us back. Get us out. I'm so frightened. What's wrong with me? Door bursts open, and automatic gunfire from 3 distinct sources can be heard. All right, Sherm. I'll have you, it's kind of hard to tell who's who in this section. They're not really labeled, but, I'll have you play the specialist. Sound good?
Gotcha.
Right on. All right. Clear.
Clear.
Clear. God damn this job. Bag that Oscar quickly, Sergeant. We still have one to go. Site breach alarm sounds. Hey, there you go. What now? Specialist, talk to me.
Sir, I'm getting a report of a Keter breach in the AR2 compound.
Oh, hell. 2 rogue Oscars, and on top of it, now the old man is loose? This is a shit sandwich, sir. Contain that chatter, Sergeant.
Stand by, sir. Sir. Negative on 106 escaping. Sir, I'm getting details. Say again, please. It's the other way around. The other Oscar, he went in, sir. He went in.
The hell he did?
They have visual confirmation. Sir, procedures dictate that we treat him...
As KIA specialist, I know. Let's finish here then. Sir, this Oscar had recording equipment here. It's still running. Oh, for the love of... Shut it down, Sergeant. Shut it down now. Specialist, get an audio hazard team down here on the double. End recording.
Woo,
well, that was
right.
SCP-2718 in all its glory.
Oh, man. That... I have read that article multiple times. We did it during the Halloween stream. But it has not hit me like it did today. Oh, man. There was something about when you went into the technician's log before the main story began, where he's describing how he coded this so that it would work. And even in that log, I was like, I have never understood the techno jargon here before. I have never understood what he's doing and what he did and how the mimetic kill agent worked and how he's doing the amnestics, and he went to look at it and I'm just like, oh shit. And then you went into the actual story with the O5s and wow, dude. wow to the article and to you, man.
I appreciate that. Having a great article to work with definitely helps out.
So, before we get into the article, I don't have a lot of notes for you on your performance because you crushed that. The viewers know you crushed that. I think you crushed that. There was the first half of the article, you didn't miss a beat. I constantly trip over my words because I have a habit of talking too fast. And so my brain has to catch up and I have to redo myself. Until you started having to clear your throat, which I assume maybe you're just not sipping enough water.
Yeah, no, I'm so not used to the longest thing I've ever read for a video. I have a video, I forget the item number. It's an anomalous hotel room, and there's a rant in that's something like 7 or 8 minutes long, I think. And that's the longest I have ever read uninterrupted. So yeah, I definitely started to get a little bit of dry throat. But, luckily, at least in the article, there's a scripted point where I can take a drink. So that was pretty nice.
Perfection.
But yeah, but no, I'm actually quite surprised I did as well as I did, honestly. I expected a lot more mistakes.
Yeah, you
Thank
got
you,
the
chat.
technical jargon you were worried about. For the viewers, before the stream, Dr. Maxwell informed me that he has a minor stutter, just normally. And first of all, you completely avoided that, so great work. Your focus pulled off.
Yeah, thank you.
And I told him this story in pre-show, but for the viewer's sake, I went to theater college when I was a youth. I was a dropout because I don't work that hard. I'm a lazy person. But one of the things I got to experience while I was at school at the University of South Florida is James Earl Jones came and visited our theater program. For anybody who doesn't know who James Earl Jones is, he is a prolific actor, both theater and film. You probably best know his voice for the voice of Darth Vader, as well as the voice of Mufasa from The Lion King. And so that bass voice, that deep voice, one of the greatest voices in theater and film. He told us the story about how when he was young, he had a crippling stutter, just barely able to talk to people. And through speech therapy, through practice, he fought through it and is now one of the greatest actors of, is it our generation or the past generation? Probably both.
Yeah, I'd say it kind of bleeds over.
So while there are things you can and can't overcome and physical limitations, don't underestimate the power of practice, because that can be overcome. And I mean, you barely have to overcome it yourself anyways.
Yeah, when I started making videos, just the whole process in general has really kind of helped me a lot. So definitely not as bad as I used to be, that's for sure.
The only thing I would ask you that you would want to look at doing to spice up your readings a little bit is something that I had to tackle as well when I started, and something I still do kind of, is when we're reading technical documents, or if we're reading something off a page, we tend to read it rather monotone with a similar sentence structure. And luckily for you, your voice is like silk. It's not a problem most of the time. But it can get a little repetitive to hear, and it starts to lack some of the emotions, especially when the characters are talking.
Mm-hmm.
And so one point where I noticed it mostly, and this also kind of sucks because there's not a lot of stage directions in this piece, is when the stage direction following our point of view character speech is she starts sobbing. And you couldn't have known that because you were reading it blind in this case. But for the recording, or if you did catch that ahead of time, starting to hyperventilate a little, starting to get into that cry space during the last sentences would add to that performance. There's a lot of ways where you can slow down or accelerate your speech to emphasize things.
Very good point. Yeah, that actually is a very good idea. Appreciate the feedback.
Happy to help. And the last thing I'll say on this subject, because it's really the only thing I can think of, in order to make that change in your diction and that change in your voice's character, one thing you can do live reading or recording, and it's the stupidest simple thing. It's one of those things where the profundity and the wisdom is in the dumbest simple package. Ask why your character is doing what they're doing. The question of why is probably the most important thing for acting performance and honestly for life. When you're like encountering a person and they are just frustrating you to no end, putting yourself in their shoes to be like, why are they reacting like this? What did they think I said? Where are they coming from? What is their motivation? You hear that all the time. What is my motivation for this scene? But why are they doing this? What is their feeling? If you can place yourself in that headspace, then doing the things where you accelerate or decelerate, where you raise pitch or lower, where you get louder or quieter, these emphasis can be added that way. Make sense?
I feel you. Yeah. Yeah, man. I've still got a lot to learn.
So do I. C-Jops in the chat, thank you. I remember your old dictations, the live dictations. I have improved a lot myself. And the more we keep plugging away at this, the more experience we have, the more stories we read, and the more people we interact with, we are constantly going to improve.
Yeah, no, we were talking about this before the show as well. Just when I watch my old stuff, I really cringe. It's amazing how far I've come personally. Quite proud of myself.
If you ever want to have a good laugh, go back to the beginning of our archives. See how we started, because the first videos I ever posted were meant to be voiceover demos. And how pretentious was I to think that those could be voiceover demos?
Yeah, no, I I feel you there. Yeah, if you want to listen to some crappy reading, you can definitely check out like my first few. SCP-2718 was like the 5th video I uploaded. It's one I've wanted to redo for a while. Actually, I've wanted to remake the video, but never really got around to it. So, getting to read it here kind of serves that purpose for me. Although, maybe someday I would love to revisit it and update it, because I sound a lot better now.
Get some good sound effects going, get all that stuff in there.
Oh, yeah.
So now moving on from voice acting to the article itself, I mean, I think we're all just still in shock because that story hits like a bus every time.
Every time, yeah.
But was there anything you noticed in this run that you hadn't before that changes how you look at it by chance, or anything you notice that just you want to talk about for the viewers as someone who sees a lot of SCPs because we read them?
Right. Kind of similar to what you said earlier. The technical jargon aspect is something I never really paid too much attention to. I kind of got the gist, okay, yeah, they swap it around, but this time around, really, I read through this before the show as well. I don't know. I kind of absorbed that part a little bit more, I guess, and I have a better grasp. There's a lot of big words in there, but I have a better grasp of the, technical aspect of what they're actually doing to keep this article hidden most of the time. Quite interesting, and honestly, I'm a little surprised, I guess, looking back at it, that that part takes up so much of the article itself. Probably the first 7-8 minutes is all just kind of techno babble stuff. It works well, nothing wrong with it, but it's quite interesting. That's a section I paid attention to a bit closer today, I think. It
is rather interesting. There's something we have to do. I don't know this answer. Oh, that's right. You told me you hadn't written any SCPs before, right?
No, not much of a writer.
So I was doing my YouTube readings for about 2 years, I think, before I actually attempted to write my first SCP. And
Oh,
there's
man.
something we
So I'm
do
like
is
right there.
go again.
So I'm like right there. I've been making videos about 2 years, so it's probably time for me to start.
When people want to learn SCPs, and Ink and Dreams just said this in the chat, that's very on point with what I'm saying, is this is my first time hearing the story, and hearing it was pretty helpful since as someone getting into this style of writing. When people are like, how do I write an SCP? It's very hard for me to describe the process of writing because I'm a college dropout, and the reason I dropped out was English 2. So I did not learn to write in a technical sense. I learned to write because I accidentally ended up the director of a community theater troupe, and that troupe did original scripts based on anime and video game characters. Like, we took modern anime and video game characters and shoved them into the Odyssey, for example, one year. And so we had a team of 6 people who would write this script, and our job was almost like a college class of, okay, break down the different scenes, break down what has to happen, fill in the blank characters with who's going to do what would they say, why would they say it. And the reason I bring this up is because in learning to write SCPs, after I had read an SCP or 3 a week for 2 years, I started to see those structural outlines of, okay, in the case of 2718, the opening dialogue is the opening section where it says, these are the containment procedures and they are moved about so that you can't find it. Okay, that justifies to the audience that you really shouldn't be reading this file because it's supposed to be off the archive. But that technical jargon sense does worlds to justify that in universe so that it does make sense when it's such a format screw from your normal SCP database entry. And going into the 05, when they make a point, okay, we are dictating this, there's 2 reasons they did that. They did that, number 1, because they had to justify that they were writing in spoken prose rather than technical document. And dictating it was their solution for that. So how did they justify dictating it? They justified it that it would make it so that you can't edit it after the fact, which is why she's a world-class dictator and doesn't have to make any corrections, blah, blah, blah. And I hadn't realized that before today.
I don't know, kind of hearing you explain it like that does, I guess looking at it from a writer's perspective, which I don't really have, it is quite interesting that what some people might just view as a whole bunch of like just technical jargon is actually serving this very important purpose to like set the stage for what's going on. And, especially considering that it is not written like a standard article. Quite the thorough analysis there, Sherm.
It's a funny thing. There's on the wiki, especially when you're limited in format the way that SCPs are, it is very important to use what limited resources you have to write to tell your story. So things like the special containment procedures. The special containment procedures in most articles are almost filler because it's not usually what people want to focus on when they read. A lot of authors are known to just like breeze by and skim the containment procedures. And in the past, I've made a purpose structurally to make the containment procedures very important so that you can use them to foreshadow, of course, your anomalies abilities so that you're essentially setting the parameters for what your creature can and can't do. That way your reader has a better idea of what's coming, and you can foreshadow that way. I say, and then in my recent SCP-5542 article, I am pretty sure I just made the containment procedures throwaway because they weren't important. Oops.
Whoops. Now, some of my favorite articles are the ones that make a purpose to tell a story, or at least begin telling an interesting story in the special containment procedures. I think it adds a lot when you can already start getting an idea of what's going on and where this is going before you even get to the description. So I always appreciate that when I read something that has some really cool, like you said, like foreshadowing in the procedures is awesome. Just little tidbits to kind of get you warmed up. Something I appreciate as a reader.
Sweetness. I am out of talking points, so do you have anything else you want to say about this piece before we start the sign-off process?
I don't think so. No, just props to the author. It's a really fantastic article.
Then my standard final question for guests. Do you have a other favorite SCP that you would recommend to the viewers to go read for homework?
Oh, man. I do. Give me 1 sec. It's a Yasi article.
Nice. And in the meantime, while you're pulling it up, remember everybody in the chat or watching this in the post show, if you enjoy Dr. Maxwell's reading tonight, make sure you go follow him on YouTube, where he's sitting at about 6.5K subs and is going to grow from there.
I appreciate that. Yeah. My recommendation would be SCP-2718 by my good friend Yasi Posse. A fantastic article. It's another one that's not exactly standard, but it tells a great story. And if you're interested, I do actually have a reading of it up on my channel. So
how convenient.
4792. Yeah, great article.
Fantastic. Go ahead and say your goodbye, and I'll take you off stream.
All right. Bye, everyone. Thank you so much for coming. I love all you guys.
Goodbye, Dr. Maxwell. And to our viewers, thank you so much for joining us tonight. I hope you had fun and learned a little something about the SCP writing process and community, and at the very least, enjoyed the hell out of that creepy-ass article. Ugh. Oh, that's dark, but in the best way. You gotta face your fears, right? So, if you like the show, remember to subscribe, hit the notification bell to see our videos, because YouTube doesn't like to send them out very well. Become a patron if you'd like to help us make bigger and better SCP productions. We will see you at the next anomalous broadcast from Site-42. Oh, Danny boy.